Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Chris Evans and I'm Managing Director of Winsome Resources. Welcome here today to what's our first corporately hosted webinar. And we're doing this webinar in an effort to be innovative in our corporate communications as we are innovative on site with our exploration and drilling. You may have seen this morning we put a new announcement out, so it's the perfect time for this webinar and I look forward to addressing it later on in the Q&A. The main purpose of today's webinar is to update shareholders on the activities we've been conducting in recent times at Winsome Resources, of which there are many. Before I do that though, I'll just run through what I consider to be the value proposition of Winsome Resources. And these are the factors that really attract investors to us and have shown us to be a very successful lithium play in Quebec over the past 18 months since our IPO. The first one is that we have a very large landholding in the highly prospective region of James Bay in Quebec. We've got about 850 square kilometres in total. Secondly, our two flagship projects, Adina and Canset, have both been extensively drilled and both of them are characterised by thick, high-grade, at-surface, coarse-grained lithium mineralisation. Thirdly, at our flagship Adina project, we are rapidly advancing towards a maiden resource later this year that's going to be of global significance. Fourthly, we've got access to key infrastructure all around our projects. Roads, but most importantly, hydropower, which will enable us to build and operate our projects with renewable energy source. Fifthly, the Quebec government is extremely supportive of mining projects in general, but battery materials projects like ours in particular. We get huge tax breaks and there's a great regulatory framework in place to construct and operate mining projects. And lastly, we've got a very healthy cash balance as a result of our recent capital raise and great support from shareholders. So now we can pursue our project goals in the short to medium term. So to summarise our position at Adina, we've got 3 drill rigs currently on site with a 4th mobilising, several of them to be turned into tracked mounted units within the next month or two. We're doing resource definition on the Jamar main zone and the footwall zone as we speak. But as we've announced in the last couple of months, we've got a total potential strike length of 3.1 kilometres at Adina. And this is because the Jamar main zone is about 750 metres in strike length. To the west, we've got the original drilling done by our predecessors back in 2018, which hit reasonable intersections of pegmatite. And then out to the east, we followed a gravity low and stuck 3 holes of our own quite recently, and again, hit pegmatites on all of those. So that's a 3.1 kilometre strike length. We're yet to fully investigate. We're really only drilling on that Jamar main zone. And then in addition to that, we've got many gravity targets to follow up on in the coming months. So not only will there be resource definition drilling coming up, but also an exciting time investigating the many targets we have at Adina. And to update on Canset, now Canset's a massive property, about 20,000 hectares total size. We've been doing drilling there for the last 5 or so months with some success. We've now demobilised a rig because it's the summer. We've got boots on the ground doing traditional exploration work, investigating the many targets we've got from geophysical surveys. They will hone in on more specific targets and then we'll recommence drilling towards the end of the summer and into the fall. As many of you will have seen in the news, Quebec is heavily affected by bushfires at the moment. As Australians, we're very familiar with this and our heart goes out to those who are directly affected by it. We've had to down tools for a week or two, as have every other exploration company in Quebec. We don't see this as a big concern. I mean, it's unprecedented for the last few years, but in the meantime, we've got core to log, we've got geological modelling to do, and many activities for our staff to go on with. All our staff are safe, and we'll keep you updated as the bushfires develop. And one of the latest updates, which we're really pleased about, and you may have seen the announcement last week, is the appointment of Simon Icapetta as Chief Development Officer for Winsome Resources. This is a newly created position and one which Simon is the perfect person to fit. Simon was formerly Chief Financial Officer for Core Lithium, and in that role he was instrumental in negotiating many of their strategic agreements and their offtake agreements. With the strategic interest that Winsome Resources is getting, his role as Chief Development Officer will be crucial to us going forward, and we'll get some fantastic outcomes. So welcome aboard, Simon. I think that was short and sharp, and that's the formalities over and the main updates, but there's no doubt things I've forgotten. So happy to take questions from anyone who's listening in. Any areas of interest, please let me know, and I'm on the line to answer them. I've just relocated to the table and I've got some questions that have just come through. The first one is the obvious one. What about the announcement that went out this morning? I neglected to talk about that in the update. The announcement this morning, obviously we're really pleased with it. We have confirmed there's multiple swarms in the footwall dike, which we previously announced. It's looking extremely positive. We've managed to put a pegmatite, modelled a pegmatite body based on the drill results we've received so far. And in addition to that, we showed that we've started testing the extensions, particularly out to the west of the Jamar main zone. We haven't yet got assays for these, but we're waiting on those, and we want to test that mineralisation in between the Jamar main zone and the drilling done by our predecessors out to the west. So it's pretty exciting, and the footwall zone itself is shaping up to be a great near-surface ore body, and future drilling and also our field work will determine whether it outcrops at the surface. We've got quite a bit of land there to the north, and we're looking at that, and certainly will be as soon as our guys get back on the ground once the government clears us and the bushfire threat is over. If anyone has any questions, please send them through. Happy to answer them. Questions just come through about how many metres of drilling do I anticipate being included in the maiden resource estimate for Adina. We've done about 22,000 metres so far at Adina, and as I said a moment ago, we're in the process of mobilising a fourth rig to site. That's expected sometime later in June, again once the bushfire threat is over and we can get the rig up on site. We should be able to do around 1,500 metres a week. So if we project that forward, we should have at least 40,000 metres available by the end of the year, and that should be the major contributor towards the maiden resource. Next question that's just come through is the intercepts that are provided in figure 4 of the most recent announcement, east and west of Jamar, have they intercepted pegmatite or spodumene? We see pegmatite in those intercepts, but we don't know. We're still waiting on assays to determine whether there's spodumene in there. As we demonstrated in our previous announcements, we have to be very careful talking about spodumene and visual analysis. So at the moment, we're leaving it at intercepted pegmatites, and we'll wait for the assays, which are coming through a little bit quicker now. It tends to be about 4 to 5 weeks that they're coming through. So within a month or so, we should have another announcement with the updated drill results. Sorry, just reading another question. The drilling program already underway at Adina. Can I provide more details on how many more holes I plan? I think probably the best explanation is the 40-ish thousand metres that I previously described, which should be adequate to put out a globally significant resource. Of course, the number of holes within that depends upon the depth. We're typically drilling holes down to a couple of 100 metres. So that hopefully that answers that question. Someone has asked about the maiden resource when it's due out. We're still expecting by the year end. Bushfires, we're expecting a couple of weeks delay. That's not the end of the world. If it pushes into a couple of months delay, then we'll be reconsidering when that comes out, and we can never quite tell what's going to happen for the rest of the year. But as far as we sit today, we'll still be going. We still plan on putting the MRE out by the end of the year. There's another question about the recent additional land holdings, the jackpot purchase to the north of Adina and immediately adjacent to it. We really like these for a couple of reasons. Number one, it gives us additional land at Adina in which to place infrastructure during the project development and operational phase, which we're really thinking about at the moment with the ongoing scoping study that we're doing. The other reason we like this land is, of course, it's immediately adjacent to us, and regardless of infrastructure, it gives us a buffer zone between ourselves and any other neighbours. But thirdly, we like the land for its prospectivity. Our gravity surveys are pushing further to the north of the JMR main zone and the footwall zone, and we've got targets further to the north. Now, we haven't yet done the gravity surveys on those new properties. However, we think it's looking very prospective. It's slightly further off Greenstone. However, that's a good indicator to start with. But given the apparent stacked nature of what we're seeing between the main zone, the footwall zone, and the multiple swarms going north, we're very excited to see what's on that land from a mineral point of view. There's a question on results from drilling at Canset. We put out some results, the announcement before this most recent one about our drilling at Canset. As I said, Canset's a huge property, 20,000 or so hectares. We've been very encouraged with the mineralised ore body we've currently found, which is of a modest size but sitting right on the road. And as I've said on previous occasions, it's characterised by really coarse-grained spodumene. We get great recovery through metallurgical test work, and it would make a perfect candidate for DSO or at least DMS only. But it's not big enough to develop yet on its own, so we've been looking around. Over the last few months, we tested visible pegmatites we could see across the property, but again, the property's vast, and we certainly haven't tested all of these yet. We had a very encouraging result with the Butte discovery about 4 kilometres away from the current mineralised main zone. And although it wasn't mineralised throughout its entirety, there was certainly intersections of lithium there. So that provides us some good targets, firstly for our field work, which is ongoing, although paused at the moment because of the fires during the summer. And then that field work combined with that previous intersection, combined with the gravity results we have, will really target us in on, well, hone us in on drill targets when we remobilise a diamond drill rig to site towards the back end of this year. As I say, Canset's a huge property. We're convinced that the mother lode is sitting there at Canset. We just need to find it, and that could take a little bit longer. There's a question about the labs in Quebec being shut down due to fires. No, they're not, because they are or the labs are in either Val d'Or or over in Ontario in the cities. They're not shut down. All of our core from the most recent drilling has now been sent to those labs, so the assays are still ongoing, despite our field work being temporarily suspended. There's a question about prioritising core from Adina over Canset assays. We're using different labs for those. So we split our risk. We were using one lab at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and we saw longer wait times. So to reduce our risk between the properties, we're using 2 different labs. There's a question about potential buyers for offtake in the near term. We're getting lots of strategic interest at the moment. We're being approached by all sorts of people from all sectors of the market, from end users to mining companies to lithium producers. We think our offtake is our most valuable the most valuable thing we hold at the moment, and we're certainly in no rush to give it away. I think at some point in the next couple of years, there'll be a time when we bring on a strategic partner, and that might involve consigning some offtake to them. But we're certainly in no hurry to do that. We've got a healthy bank balance, and if and when we need to raise more money to develop the project to the next stage, we essentially know we can do that in a fairly vanilla form through an equity raising without the need for an equity partner if we don't, for a strategic partner if we don't want. Now, that's not saying we're not going to, but it's a nice position to be in. It's a position of strength, so that we're not going to be forced into taking on a partnership that doesn't suit the development of our projects and all us shareholders. There's a question about, based on the current drilling data, what's the estimated tonnage of Adina? There's rumours of 30 or 50 million tonnes close. I can't really comment on the size of the deposit yet. I think it's going to be globally significant. When simple volumetric calculations over the 750 metre strike length of the Jamar main zone, 200 metres depth and 40 to 50 metres true thickness might give an indication of the volume in the Jamar main zone. And then on top of that, we've also got the footwall zone sitting to the north. Some basic calculations can be made out of that and some estimates made, but until we complete the drilling and undertake the geological analysis, it's a little bit too early to put specific numbers on it. Top 3 milestones that Winsome wishes to achieve by the end of 2023. Well, I think the maiden resource, publication of a maiden resource at Adina is the first one. Publication of a preliminary economic analysis, a PEA, or a scoping study at Adina is another. And depending on the specific timing, we aim to release that either with the MRE or immediately after it. Depending on activities over the next couple of weeks, that could push into early next year, but that's certainly a target of ours for this year. They're the 2 major outcomes for this year, really focusing on Adina, and also to find specific targets at Canset, I think, and bring a rig back and really start developing a substantial resource at Canset. There's a question about the drill rig at Canset being moved to Adina. No, it wasn't. We demobilised it in order to get our summer crew on the ground, complete our gravity surveys, and really hone in on some more targets before we remobilise a rig back to Canset. The rigs at Adina are heli-mounted, whereas the Canset rig was ground-based. And although, as I mentioned, we're turning several of the rigs at Adina into ground-based units, we're essentially helicoptering in tracks, mounting them on the tracks. And that way, they're not subject to as many helicopter moves. They can drill a number of holes in the one position without a helicopter move, and that increases the penetration rate and the number of drill meters we can get with each rig. But there's a question here about the company focus on ESG and how do we support these outcomes. We certainly do have a very strong focus on ESG, and to deliver on this focus, we recently appointed Genevieve Morinville as our VP of Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs. The way we deliver on our ESG is, firstly, we're in a great jurisdiction for it. We've got hydropower with which to build and then operate our projects. Secondly, we've got very good relations thus far, and we're continuing to develop them with the First Nations people, which is the Cree people, over 2 different communities between Canset and Adina. And also we've put an ESG roadmap out on our website recently. We've done an analysis of stakeholders, and we've identified the ESG targets that we need to be meeting over the next few years to make sure we are a world-class company in terms of ESG outcomes. And that starts right now. Even though we're early stage, we're still advanced exploration. We can build ESG into the core of the company. So it's not just a bolt-on meant for investors at the end. It's actually something that contributes to the company and contributes to the communities in which we work. There's a question here about coarse spodumene at Canset and Adina, and is there any fine spodumene present? The spodumene crystals aren't uniform, and we see a wide variance between even Canset and Adina. At Canset, they're feet in length, meters in length, in fact, and at Adina, they're centimeters in length. Now, both of these are classified as coarse because the fine-grained spodumene is almost invisible to the eye. We don't see much that fine, but there's a variance between the coarseness, both within the projects and between the projects. But I think the point about coarse-grained spodumene, which starts at centimeters big, at large, like at Adina, means that there's great recovery from heavy liquid separation, or DMS. Which makes that sort of low carbon, low capex option very viable to us at both projects. How might strip ratios be around the Adina main ore body as shown in our release today, and does Adina generally go to the surface? We haven't done the calculations yet, and we don't have enough drilling information or have put out the JORC resource, of course, to predict the strip ratios. But given that the JMAR main zone pretty much outcrops at the surface over the entire 750 metres, or it's within several metres of the surface for the entire 750 metres, that bodes very well for the strip ratio. We are investigating the footwall zone to see whether that does come out at the surface, but it appears to be dipping on slightly more of an angle than the JMAR main zone. So between these two, it's looking at like a very favourable strip ratio overall. Someone's asked about the update on Power Metals and the geophysical survey results that came out. We really like Power Metals because it's in a slightly different jurisdiction. There's been a whole lot of drilling. There's been over 13,000 metres. And despite not specifically looking for lithium, they were actually looking for cesium, they continue to strike lithium on a consistent basis. With that amount of drilling and with the strikes of lithium that they've had, it looks to us like there's every possibility of getting a resource in the short term at Power Metals. And with the geophysical surveys that have just been done that have highlighted several interesting targets, and again, that can be used very effectively because we already know where some of the lithium lies based on the previous drilling. It's not like we're drilling greenfields ground. So comparing that to other targets highlighted by the geophysical survey gives us some great ideas about where to drill. And then we've got a 15,000 metre drill program coming up later this year. Now, with the 13,000 already done and the 15,000 coming up, that should be more than enough to establish a resource. And then our rights of offtake for lithium, cesium and tantalum, but particularly the lithium, become very valuable. We and Power Metals are being approached by strategics already to try and deal on that. Our response is the same as it is with Winsome. We don't need a strategic partner yet, but we're happy to keep talking, and we want to see what's there before we go dealing on the offtake. It's a very good question here about the transport routes and what will it look like. Well, from Adina, there's a planned route. La Grande Alliance, which is a government body that's in cooperation with First Nations people, has planned a north-south route between the Renard mine to our south of Adina up to the Trans-Tiger Highway to the north. And the pre-feasibility study for this road shows it running within a couple of kilometres of Adina. Now, we're taking actions to start building the northern part of that road in the short term, as in by the end of next year, so that we can more easily access Adina. And then our assumption is, and we're in talks at the moment with the government about building the southern half, so that by the time we come into operation, there should be a north-south road running almost adjacent to Adina, and that will allow us to move our product directly to the south and probably get to Chibougamau. Now, Chibougamau is a couple of 100 kilometres away, but there's a rail line there, and that then gives access to every major hub within Quebec and also into Ontario and, in fact, into the US if need be. So we see a transport solution presenting itself over the time that we develop the project in the next few years. There's a question here on M&A, and is our team looking outside of Quebec? I think M&A is almost certainly going to be happening in the lithium sector in Canada over the coming years. Not everyone's going to be able to build their own converter to produce lithium hydroxide or carbonate, and there's going to be a strong push by the Canadian government to keep products within Canada. So I think that will result in some natural consolidation. I think we're a natural target for M&A. However, it goes back to my previous point. We can run our race on our own at the moment because everyone can see we've got a world-class resource with Adina. We can raise our own money and we continue to develop that project until a point where we feel either M&A or bringing on a strategic partner is appropriate. We're not specifically looking outside of Quebec at the moment, although our Power Metals acquisition last year hopefully shows that we've got our eye out for good acquisitions. We do want to grow the company in the future, and we recognise the benefit of a bit of jurisdictional diversification outside of Quebec. But really, our main focus is developing Adina and Canset. That's what's going to make us into a $1 billion plus company. Picking up smaller assets in Ontario or Manitoba or elsewhere in Canada will certainly add to the company in the long term. But the quickest way to bring real value to shareholders is the development of those two projects, on which we know there is world-class lithium deposits. Next question is, are there other areas at Adina with geophysical results that should be drilled? Absolutely there are. We've done extensive gravity surveys, which we've tried to show in some of our recent announcements, the extent of the gravity surveys, mainly to the north and out to the west of the Jmar main zone. We've got some very positive results that indicate there's pegmatites under a bit of cover in both of those areas, to the north and to the west. And when we get around to it, we'll be drilling those. We're doing the geostatistical analysis at the moment of the maiden resource to work out whether we've got capacity to use one of the rigs to investigate these new targets in the coming months. Another question on Power Metals here. Are we still working on a cooperation agreement? Yes, we are. We haven't formalised that yet. The logical time to formalise that, I think, is in the next couple of months as we move towards drilling with Power Metals. And the reason for that is a lot of our geologists live in Val d'Or and Rouen, the sort of mining hub of Quebec, and they are some of the closest towns to the Power Metals Case Lake site. Even though it's in Ontario, it's only about an hour across the border. So to drive from Rouen, for example, to the Case Lake project is only about 2 hours. So there's the ability for our geologists, maybe on their off time or for other reasons, to assist Power Metals. And we want a cooperation agreement in place for that to formalise how we work together. There's an interesting one here. What do I attribute the first discovery success of the Adina project to? It would be easy to say luck. It would be very blithe to say luck because the Jmar main zone was outcropping and our teams needed a place to land their helicopter last summer. But of course, that's a very simplistic answer. When they landed, they then saw spodumene within the outcrop. And ironically, that it's a bit of a joke around Canada. That's where a lot of lithium, that's the way a lot of lithium has been discovered, because there's outcrops, there's no trees, and a helicopter can land. But of course, there's a lot more than that. The geologists were aiming for that area based on geophysical surveys and a systematic search of the high ground, which tends to be where the pegmatite outcrops occur at Adina. So I think really the success is attributable to the knowledge of Carl Kumartin, our VP Exploration at the time, and he's now our country manager, his experience in Canada looking for lithium, and also the diligence of our geologists on site. They did a lot of hard work last summer. There was a lot of kilometres walked through the scrub. There's a lot of nasty flies around at that point. So it's hard work and diligence and skill that really led to that discovery at Adina. There's a question here on Cermak. When's it going to be drilled? We're certainly going to be doing some work on Cermak this summer. We've got plans to send a team down there, and we're going to do some geophysical surveys to identify targets. With Canset and Adina on the go, it's our lower priority at the moment. However, as I've said before, we like having a pipeline of projects, and the same applies to Dessel and Mazarak further to the south. Once Canset and Adina are in their project development phase in a year or two, we continue to need discoveries and drilling results to keep investors excited and to provide that blue sky to show that we're not just a one project company. Our current cash balance, this question here, was 50 million at the end of last quarter. Going back to the maiden resource, there's a question here about a December 2022 interview I did with Howard Klein, saying we want to be in a position to publish a maiden resource by mid this year, and why has that changed? Well, I don't think that has changed. We've done 22,000 metres of drilling at Adina, and if you look at some of our peers in Canada who have published more modest resources, they've done that with far less than 22,000 metres. So I'd say it hasn't changed. We're still in a position to put one out if we chose. We've chosen not to. We think showing a globally significant maiden resource is more important than rushing out a resource of a smaller scale. There's another very good question here about timelines for permitting and the Canadian government's commitment to expediting the permitting process. The Canadian government's very aware, and I've had several meetings with them in the last month or so, that the focus is on Canada at the moment, and that there's a lot of questions being asked about the regulatory framework and the permitting process. The Canadian government's been extremely useful so far, and our peers over there who are slightly more advanced than us have said the same thing. The Canadian government's been very good at facilitating the process within the current framework. I think it's a reasonable framework, and it takes into account, particularly in Quebec, because it takes into account all the stakeholders necessary to get permits in place. And of course, this is primarily the communities affected by the mining projects themselves. The permitting process from initial baseline surveys into becoming fully approved takes a minimum of 3 years. And to me, that's very similar to almost any other jurisdiction in the world. Now, if you have environmental hurdles along the way, if there's a threatened species or there are other factors, then this can take longer. Some of our peers, like Alchem, for example, and the Namaska project before us as well, and also the Rose project for critical elements, have gone through quite a lengthy approval process for their lithium projects over the last 4 or 5 years. And there's a whole lot of lessons to be learnt there. They had the first mover sort of disadvantage because there hadn't been too many lithium projects before them. So we're gathering the data that they have published and which they're willing to share with us so that we can minimise our timeframes. The Canadian government, as I said, has a strong regulatory framework in place. It's comparable to other international jurisdictions, but the government is very good at facilitating the pathway through these approvals for us. So, for example, I was in New York maybe a month ago with the Canadian government delegation in New York, and the mining minister from Quebec was there. And she pointed me in the right direction, who to speak to for environmental approvals, the process, and it felt like a very supportive government. I'm probably rambling a bit here, but 3 years is the minimum to cut that question short. We're doing everything we can to stick to that, and we don't see any environmental hurdles yet at either of our projects. There's another question here about any more claim or land agreements around Adina. We're always looking around. We think it's a very strategic position, but we're not just picking up land for the sake of it. We've got enough land to publish world-class maiden resources and have company-making projects in themselves. So we're always looking, but we're not just grabbing land for the sake of it. Ladies and gents, thank you for your time this morning. I think that wraps up most of the questions. I really appreciate your time. We've had a great number of people log on today, and the questions have been very well informed. I look forward to doing another one of these at regular intervals throughout the year. Thank you. Goodbye.